As you might recall, previously we had talked in the book of Zechariah in the beginning of that chapter where we were looking at, does anybody remember what we were looking at?
Chariots.
Yes, horses and chariots. That was a fascinating discussion. Some going this way and some going that way. Rather enigmatic, and iron or bronze mountains and such. That was fascinating. The section today is where the narrative switches over to talking about the crowns and these different guys that we're collecting money from, and we're going to make one or two, depending upon your interpretation of this passage, crowns that are going to go on the head of Yeshua or Joshua, the high priest, as a symbolic. It's symbolic of something. We're going to figure that out. It has something to do with the branch and, building the temple of Yah. This is going to be fascinating. So listen up as we read this together and pay attention to things that kind of stand out to you, because you know how I always ask you as you're reading the passage, what sticks out to you like a sore thumb as places where you're likely to want to dig for a little bit deeper meaning. And that's probably where we're going to be digging. So let's take a moment and read the remainder of this passage so we can refamiliarize ourselves with it. If you're in the book of Zechariah, chapter 6, verse 9 is where we are starting. It says, "And the word of Yah came to me, saying, Take of them of the captivity, even of Heldai, of Tobiah, and of Yediah, which are come from Babylon, and go the same day, and go into the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah. Then take silver and gold, and make crowns, and set them on the head of Joshua or Yeshua, the son of Josedek, the high priest. And speak to him, saying, Thus says Yah of hosts, saying, Behold, the man whose name is the branch. And he shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of Yah. Even he shall build the temple of Yah. And he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule on his throne, and he shall be a priest on his throne. And the counsel of peace shall be between them both. And the crowns shall be to Chelem, and to Tobiah, and to Yediah, and to Chen, the son of Zephaniah, for a memorial in the temple of Yah. And they that are far off shall come and build in the temple of Yah. And you shall know that Yah of hosts has sent me to you. And this shall come to pass if you will diligently obey the voice of Yah, your Elohim." Now that's a fascinating passage. What do you see and that kind of piques your interest and makes you want to prod and poke a little below the surface to see what's going on there? Hey Evan, hand that microphone to Jerry for me. Thank you, sir.
Sounds an awful lot to me like the Millennium Temple, Yeshua being he's going to be the King of Kings, and I didn't know he was going to be the High Priest, but I guess he is.
Yeah. But
it certainly sounds an awful lot like the Millennium.
It's very much sounding rather prophetic, isn't it? Okay, excellent. And anyone else, either in-house or online, just elements in that passage that you saw that kind of piqued your interest? Who is it? It's Keith. What do you got for me, Keith?
So in verse 13 it says that he shall sit on his throne and he shall be priest, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both.
Right.
What? So that's a little between them both.
Yeah. Who's the both? That's a great question. Anyone else? What else do you see that's kind of interesting there? Anything unusual? Anything a little strange?
You mentioned his name is Branch.
Yeah, it sounds like his name is Branch. I know that you've probably heard that before. Where have you heard that?
Nazareth is Branch.
Nazareth, yes. Netzarim. It's kind of a play on words there, so that's certainly interesting. Anyone else? Any other observations? Hayden, would someone hand Hayden that microphone? Pass that back over there.
There's a bunch of names of specific people, like Heldai of Tobijah and of Jediah, and there's a lot of names here. And
yeah, there's quite a few names.
Son of.
So, you probably go ahead.
Are these actual people? If so, where are they anywhere else in the Bible, or what have they done? Or
yeah,
because he's talking about what's going to happen to all these people and what they're doing, and I'm sure this is also symbolic of Christ, but
well, that's a great observation.
Of anything like this happening to these people.
That's a great observation, and we'll need to poke around a little bit and see who are these people, and are they mentioned in other places? What do their names mean? I know that when we first read this passage, Brett was saying, there's a lot of names here. It's always a great idea to look at name meanings and see what's going on there. Tracy?
It needs a little more examination, but it appears to be a chiasm. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but the middle of it would be this verses 12 and 13 about this branch coming forth and building the temple. That seems to be the center of this chiastic
That would be the place I'd expect to see it. Absolutely. So take a look at that a little bit more closely, because a chiastic structure is always very interesting.
It's a mirror, and that word, the word that comes from Shamayim, is that how you say it? Shamayim. It actually is Strong's 8138, which is the verb it comes from, which is shana, which means to repeat or do again.
Right. Excellent. Osmundo. Where'd you go, Osmundo?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
So I'm looking in verse 11 where I think your son was just commenting on Yeshua, son of Yehosadek, which is Yeshua, son of Jehovah, our righteousness, which is another title that Yeshua has, which lines up with chapter 3, where it talks about the high priest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you tie those two together, it's definitely Yeshua, son of Jehovah, our righteousness.
Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating. You guys are picking up good stuff, man. You're absolutely picking up good stuff. So you guys are well trained, not by me, but by the Spirit of Yah, that you know when you look at these passages where you need to dig. And who is it? It's David. What's up, David? Tell us what's happening.
Yeah, I had something I was going to share last week, but you guys had such a great discussion. It was part of the study. It had to do with the colors in the prior verses.
Oh.
And, it's just one, I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but with the colors, I was seeing yam, which is like the word for sea. So I was seeing red sea, black sea, 11 sea, and a bar sea. Bar sea is actually a place. It's on the western coast of the UK. And bar doesn't mean a lot to probably other people, but I can give you the name of a notable bard.
Hey.
Elizabeth. And the 11 sea, another name for the Vatican is the Holy See, but S-E-E.
Yeah.
It's a little play on words kind of thing. But the Black Sea and the Red Sea seem to be kind of relevant to our time.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good observations. So I think let's get a running start here and take a look at these guys who are named here, and I'll put that little passage back up on the screen so that you can have a quick and easy reference. So their names are on the screen. So what I'm looking at here is apparently these are some guys who came back from Babylon to assist in rebuilding the temple with Zechariah and the governor and Joshua the high priest. They had these are obviously principal men, meaning they're men of some importance, or they probably wouldn't be picked out by name and identified and spoken of in this way. We have to assume that these are principal men of the community. And many people look at one of the last lines in this passage, which says that this will be a memorial to them in the temple of Yah. Now, why would it be a memorial to them? Is that saying that they are being honored in some way? Because it seems like what's happening here is that the prophet is told to go to these people, and what it sounds like is collecting an offering, collecting money from them. It also indicates to me that they probably have money. And so he's collecting money from these wealthy individuals who have returned from Babylon so that they can build this crown. Because frankly, the Hebrew of this text does not suggest more than one crown. Although the translation that I read for you here used the plural of crowns twice. But the Hebrew construction really ought to be singular, I think. And what that suggests to me is that this is a gold and silver crown that's mixed, which frankly goes along beautifully with this passage about the mixing of these two offices in one person, the king and the priest together. So gold and silver being mixed into one symbolic crown, being placed on the head of Joshua the high priest, and then placed into the temple as a memorial for these guys from whom the money was taken to build this special crown. Now the question is, why does it get placed into the temple as a memorial for them? Some people have suggested it's because they're men of honor and that it is somehow honoring them by placing that in the temple. I don't think that's the case. A lot of good interpreters interpret that passage to say that these men, although they had the fortitude to leave Babylon, they were obviously doing fairly well in Babylon, like we know that some of the Hebrews did. They were getting along pretty well there. We know that when they came back from the Babylonian captivity, only about 50,000 people returned. The bulk of them stayed there because it was just more comfortable. We've been living in Babylon for 70 years, and we've gotten comfortable. We've raised families, we've got businesses, we're doing commerce. Things are going okay there. We don't want to give up everything and go to some desolation in the wilderness that we're going to have to rebuild from scratch. That doesn't sound like fun to me. Probably doesn't to you either. So the issue here, I think, is that what's happening is that these men are actually being chastised. That they probably, according to a lot of interpreters, and there's some evidence to suggest this, that they came and they were trying to be faithful, but there's a possibility, because of some of the language that is used at the end of this passage, that it's possible that they got there and they were trying to do their best, but they actually began to badmouth the process. That they actually began to say, gosh, man, this is worse than we thought it was going to be, or this is not going well, or how is this ever going to work out? From the books of Nehemiah and Ezra, Malachi, that they had a hard time. They were being hounded by enemies. Sometimes they were fighting with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other while they're trying to build. So this is a very dangerous and difficult situation that's fraught with peril, and that perhaps these guys were actually kind of getting downhearted and may have even been talking a little bit of trash about this process. This is not going well. And that this is the reason that the prophet is sent to them to say, you know what, I want to take an offering from you and I'm going to build a crown and I'm going to tell you what's happening here. Now, you also have to look at the fact that, are they rebuilding a temple here? Yes, they are. So the prophecies have an immediate fulfillment for them in their day. But very clearly, there's something far off into the future about this thing, because we're talking about this. This is where this gets weird, is where we start talking about this branch and, Joshua the high priest. I'm sure that they're reading this and going, wait a minute. Are you saying that we're going to make Joshua the high priest a king and a priest? That doesn't make any sense. We've never had those two offices combined in one person. So I'm certain that they would have been struggling with this, trying to interpret this just like we are. But we have a lot more hopefully, a lot more clarity of vision, because we see the Messiah Yeshua and we see these prophecies having been fulfilled to some degree, or at least a precursor, a presaging. We can see what's happening here a little bit because we have more fuller revelation living as we do, 2,400 years later, and we got a little bit more insight into historically what's been happening. But looking at the names of these people, did you guys look those names up, and did you see anything interesting there? Mm-hmm. Who looked up the names of these people, and what would you say about them? Anything that you think is noteworthy?
Yeah, there are people that came from the world. They're exiles, came out of Babylon. So you got like worldliness, Hebrew 24:67, Chaldai, Toby Yah, goodness of Yah, Yedi Yah, Yah has known, Zephaniah, Yah has secreted or treasured, Yoshai, founded of Yah. So these are people, like when you look at Zechariah 13:9, and then they're being brought through third part of the fire to refine them as silver and gold. And I think when you jump to like Revelation, you see 3:18, I counsel you buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and your faith will be like gold that's tested in fire. 1 Peter 1:7, all those things, people that are coming out during this end time, building his house, his temple, which is his people, just like your body. You're getting rid of all the dross, you're getting rid of the lead, the tin, and he's bringing you through situations that are tested, like you mentioned that the Jewish rabbi who mentioned everything, but what the rabbi didn't leave out is when you obey the Torah, the law forces you to die to yourself. So when you're doing that, you're getting gold and silver because you're dying to yourself. Yeah.
Did you find it fascinating that most of these names seem to have a goodly connotation? Like, Tobiah, Yah is good, and Yediah, Yah has known, and whom Yah heals, and Yah has treasured, except for Heldai, worldly. Yeah. That does not sound like a good nickname.
But you're in exile.
Who is it? It's Tracy Tim. What's up, Tracy Tim?
What's interesting about that, looking at it in the interlinear, I'm reading it in the Hebrew, it says, take from the exiles from Heldai, and that's that worldliness word.
Yeah.
So, take from the exiles of the world, from the goodness of Yah, it's kind of going in that direction maybe.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it. I think that the juxtaposition of those words is taking from the worldly exiles. That kind of plays into what I was saying a moment ago, where these people maybe somewhat faithful, they've come back, but maybe you're not perfectly faithful in attitude, and I think that this crown has to be built somewhat as a reminder for them. That's just my idea. It's a very popular idea. I certainly didn't come up with it, but it's just something to think about.
Later on, it turns into Helm, the dream, so it's like coming out of the Matrix. Wake up, you sleepers.
Yeah.
When you realize, oh my gosh, all this is a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're gonna take this silver and gold from these guys, and they're gonna make a crown. I personally absolutely believe that this is a singular crown that is mixed of gold and silver, and they're gonna place it on the head of Joshua the high priest as a symbol of something to come later, because he is not going to be wearing this crown of gold, and he is not going to be a king and a priest. But what we have is that he will oversee the building of this renewed temple, but he will not do all that is suggested in this passage. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit more carefully. I think what's kind of fascinating, and I want to bring your attention to it for just a moment, is, do you have any ideas about why we might be seeing the mixing of silver and gold? Do those somehow hold some symbolism for you that might suggest something? Anybody have any ideas about silver and gold? Where do we see those prominently in the scripture? There's lots of mentions of silver and gold in the book of the Revelation of Yeshua, the Messiah. That's true.
Is there silver used anywhere in the temple?
Building the temple, yes, it's very prominently displayed in the building of the temple. Do you remember where silver and gold is used in the construction of the tabernacle, at least when it's described in the book of Exodus? There's a lot of gold inside the Holy of Holies and inside the holy place and in the walls, as Sir Seal has pointed out just now online. Outside of the actual holy place, in the enclosure, you've got silver sockets and hooks and stuff like that are holding together this exterior structure. And then in the center, outside of the temple, you've got the bronze stuff, the bronze altar and the bronze laver. But silver is used around the enclosure. Now, I'm not entirely certain what to suggest by that, although I have a few ideas. Do you guys have any ideas about what might be suggested by these precious metals and their location within the tabernacle and how it might connect to this?
Well, the silver, the outer part of it, you're talking about the actual temple, or are you talking about the tabernacle?
Either one.
Because the tabernacle was made with like skin. Right?
Yeah.
And it had silver. Well, Yeshua was sold for silver.
Yeshua was sold for silver coins. Yeah, that's a good insight. Notice that. What do you believe when you look at the tabernacle? Because we're talking primarily about the construction of the tabernacle, where it gets a lot of description about the materials used. I mean, we get some materials lists and construction details about Solomon building his temple. But it's not quite as expansive. You notice that when in the book of Exodus, you know that the construction of the tabernacle, more instruction is given than anything else in the Bible, except for Ezekiel, where he goes for chapter after chapter talking about the construction of what appears to be a millennial temple, or who knows what that is. Carla, go ahead.
One of the things I've read before about the metals in the tabernacle is that it created an electromagnetic sphere area set apart, and it was a conductor, if you will. And so I think of the frequencies again that come into play in that.
Absolutely. That's a good insight. I think that I'm not going to pull out any amazing, wonderful things for you there, but I do encourage you to dig a little deeper into the construction of the temple and what the temple. Has anybody ever heard about what certain elements of the temple complex might symbolically represent? What have you heard?
A person.
A person. Yes, that's an excellent and interesting insight, that the temple is laid out, and the tabernacle is laid out like a human, the human body, with the head and the brain being the Holy of Holies and the outside. Yeah, it's fascinating. If you look that up, you'll see some interesting things. But in relation to the materials used, silver and gold being placed on the head of this high priest as a symbolic act of somehow the mixing of these two offices on the head. Authority on the head of Yeshua the Messiah. So I think it just makes sense to maybe poke around a little bit about silver and gold and see if there's something symbolic and interesting about that. I will point out to you just one interesting thing that I found, and I got a couple of scriptures here that I want to share with you. I like to look at the first mention of things in the Bible when they're first mentioned, because that can be pretty instructive. Now, when you look up the first mention of gold in the Bible, does anybody have any idea where that might be?
Golden Havilah.
The gold of Havilah. That is correct. Now, that's fascinating, but that's also really difficult to make a connection there, because we're basically in that context talking about a mineral. But it's got value, obviously, or Moses wouldn't have mentioned it. I mean, it's obviously got value, but I think you want to look at perhaps where the gold is actually given some type of weight as being valuable in the scripture and not just mentioned as a mineral. So the first mention is there. That one you might talk to Halissa Alewine. She might be able to give you something a little deeper in that.
That land is good.
They said the gold in that land is
It's
good.
not just a mineral.
Yeah, no, I know that it's not just a mineral, but I'm saying that that's beyond my capability to dig in that
I
spot.
think it's a whole workbook.
That is a whole workbook in the Hebrew, in the Gospels, in her creation gospel. Absolutely, David, sing it, sister, brother.
But when you were talking about the temple and the body and stuff, my mind immediately went to that statue in Daniel, in the dream that Daniel interpreted.
Yes.
The gold, chest of silver, the waist of bronze,
Right.
legs of iron.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it, as you get lower, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's an interesting thought. You're sending me down a rabbit trail.
Uh-oh, don't go too far, buddy. Anyway, I'll show you these couple of passages that I found that start to provide some value and some weight to these precious metals of silver and gold. The first one that I will point out to you is in Genesis 20:6, where Abimelech says to Sarah, Abimelech said, "Behold, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. This is compensation for you so that you will stand vindicated before all who are with you." Remember that he had taken Sarah into his household for a time because Abraham had lied again and said, "This is my sister." Notice that this is kind of like redemption money being given here. This is a symbolic, quite a lot of money that is given to Abraham as a representation that Sarah is innocent. Hold on to that for just a moment and contemplate that. That's quite fascinating. It's almost like a ransom payment to declare someone innocent. It's an interesting thought. The next passage that I will share with you is from Genesis also, and that's Genesis 13. This is the first time where the coins and the silver and gold are mentioned in relation to having value and having great weight. So Abraham went up from Egypt into the Negev, and he took his wife and all his possessions with him, as well as Lot. Now Abraham was very wealthy in livestock, silver, and gold. Now, this one was interesting to me. I thought the one about, Sarah being redeemed for 1,000 pieces of silver was fascinating. This one threw me for just a moment, and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, what is this instructive in some way, or am I reaching? It occurred to me that now think about this. This crown that is going to be placed on the high priest and symbolic of Yeshua is somehow combining priest and king. Priest and king. Do you see anything in these two passages in Genesis that are suggestive in some way of priestship or priesthood or kingship? Is there any connection there? Do you see anything interesting there? What about Abraham? Does he represent a king or a priest in any way? Let me ask you this. Would you apply the title or the idea, at least, of a king to Abraham? Is he ruling anything?
I think so.
He's a foreigner in a foreign land. Jerry, shout it out.
How about Abraham and Melchizedek?
His relationship with Melchizedek, that's a fascinating one right there for sure. That's a good one. Hold on to that thought. Yeah, hold on to that thought. What about him as a king? Do you have any kind of inclination about Abraham having any kind of kingship or ruling anything? Does that really fit at all? Osmundo?
What's that scripture where Jehovah tells Abraham that kings will come from his loins?
I was going to say it's an
Okay,
inheritance.
yes, a king, his inheritance. So yes, you can see that he will give birth down the line to kings, and that all peoples will bless themselves by him. And we know that one of his descendants will rule the whole world. So that's an interesting connection to kingship. What about priesthood? And I know there's a connection with Melchizedek there a little bit, but what about priesthood? Think about what a priest is. What does a priest do? Think about where the tribe of the priesthood, where does that come from? Which tribe is the priest? Levi. What does Levi mean?
Attached.
Attached. What is being attached?
Right.
God and man. That's correct. I believe that that's really what we're talking about here, is that the tribe of Levi is kind of like a connecting piece between heaven and earth. That you know, the people come to the Levitical priesthood, who then pass it on to the Father in the form of worship, and that instruction and guidance in the form of teaching and sometimes prophecy comes down from Father to the tribe of Levi and is passed down and disseminated to the children of Israel. So Levi is a connecting piece. Do we ever see Abraham serving in that way?
Yes.
We absolutely do. And in fact, it's right in relation to this passage that we just talked about with Abimelech. So, and you would expect to see, because he is the progenitor of the Messiah Yeshua way down the line, that you would expect to see hints and foreshadowings of kingship and priesthood in Abraham himself. In fact, you also see the first mention of a prophet. Remember, we studied that like a couple of years ago, where the first mention of a prophet is actually Abraham himself, and it's in the same passage, where it says his whole household got sick because of Sarah. He closed up all their wombs, and he said, go to Abraham, he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and all of you will be healed. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. Well, before Yeshua was born, around the time he was born, from what I have heard, there was no... the Levitical priesthood was acting as priests and kings at that time because there was no king. And so...
Who you say that in the time of Yeshua, that the tribe of Levi was acting as both king and priest?
I do believe there was no king at the time.
Well, there were several kings at the time. The Herod, the Tetrarch, is that who you're referring to? Because he was a Hasmonean. He was descended from Esau. The Levites, if you follow that, that's a curious conversation, because a lot of people believe that the legitimate Levitical priesthood from Zadok, they had fled the temple compound a long time ago and were living in the desert, and we know them as the people of Qumran. That's, some people believe that. And that the priesthood that was in charge in Yeshua's day was actually a false priesthood that was not descended from Zadok, and that office was bought and sold as a political thing.
Well, because you know, in the Lazarus, the story about Lazarus, the rich young ruler,
yeah,
that's actually talking about the destruction. Actually, it's talking about the death of Yeshua and I think his resurrection too in that parable, and it also is talking about the destruction of the Levitical priesthood, because it mentions it. He says, "Can I go back and tell my 5 brothers?" Well, Levi had 5 brothers, and then it mentions also that the rich man they wore white, which is like priests, and then they had the red and the purple that kings wore. So it's symbolic of those priests and the kingship right there in that parable. I think so. I'm
interesting.
Pretty sure, and that's what that parable is about. It's not about what some people think it's about.
Fascinating. Yeah. So you're going above my head for sure.
It's about Christ's resurrection, because when the rich man is asking him, he says, "Well, can I go back and tell my brothers?" And he said, "Well, your brothers have Moses and the prophets, and if they don't believe in Moses and the prophets, they're not going to believe in a dead man when he rises up out of the grave."
Yeah.
And it's Yeshua.
Yeah.
In that parable. So it's
Okay.
He's
Yeah.
letting them know.
Yeah.
He's gonna
Fascinating.
raise up, and they're not going to believe in him.
Yeah. Fascinating. Fascinating. So I think that when you look at the idea of silver and gold and you try and relate it to kingship and priesthood, you find some interesting things, but it does definitely require more study. And I think that a good place to dig further would be into the temple complex and the tabernacle complex, to dig maybe a little bit and see a little bit more insight there. It'd be fascinating. But I want to move forward just a little bit, because I want to talk about the combining of king and priest. Obviously, this is not possible with Joshua, the high priest serving at the time, although he might have been a wonderful guy. But we've already noted from one of the previous passages here that he was clothed in filthy garments that were like excrement covered. We had some disgusting things going on there. Was that symbolic of his sin? We don't necessarily know that, but it might have been represented by the sin of the people attaching itself to him, perhaps. But it's not likely that this is symbolic for him. It's not possible for this high priest or any other human being to wield both political and spiritual leadership roles. Do you have any idea why that might be? Kevin, what are your thoughts about that? Why is it impossible for a man, a normal human being, to combine the role of king and priest? Do you have any idea? Who has the microphone? I don't need it. I'm just saying keep it handy because somebody might want to say something. Who wants to talk?
Isn't a priest a servant?
Who?
A priest. Isn't their role to serve and a king's rule? Aren't they?
Angela has an excellent insight that a king's job is to rule and a priest's job is to be a servant. Those are at opposite ends of the spectrum. That's a good insight.
Yeah.
So why does that make it incredibly challenging for a human being to be both a king and a priest?
Because you need the respect of others to be a king. I don't know.
Because you need the respect of others to be a king, but if you're a servant of others, you might be lacking in respect. Okay, that's a good insight. Osmundo, what's up?
Just the origination I was looking at, possibilities of the two in the natural. Because the priest has to come from Levi. The tribe of Levi, you cannot marry into it. You have to be a descendant of Aaron by blood. As far as kingship, it's instructed that the king will come through King David, which is of the tribe of Judah. So you have two different tribes, two different offices.
Right. So we know who is it? It's David. Tell us what you got, David.
I actually was in a really deep study of genealogy that there was a suggestion that John the Baptist, his father, was like one of the last of the Zadik. And so when he died, he was the last Zadik, if you will. But then they also suggested that in Jesus' lineage, there's a linkage all the way back to Melchizedek. That when John died, there was only one remaining son.
I've heard about that, yeah. That is certainly possible. Yeah, no, that's a good insight. I think when you're looking at it from a heavenly perspective, you have to look at a couple of different things. Number one, yes, we have instructions that only priests can come from the tribe of Levi. That's pretty clear cut. But it doesn't say that only kings can only come from the tribe of Judah, because we had a king from the tribe of Benjamin before we had a king from the tribe of Judah. It prophesies that the descendant of David will rule on a messianic type of kingdom, but there's no real clear indication until later that the tribe of Judah is locked down by prophetic utterance, not by the command of the Torah, for example. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think when you look at it from a top-down perspective, you kind of have to think about it like this. Like Angela was saying a moment ago, a king has to actually be able to rule in perfect righteousness, whereas a priest has to rule with a king has to rule with perfect justice. Is what's more important, is justice with a king. A priest needs to rule with perfect righteousness. Righteousness and justice are these two things that are so incredibly valuable to each of those offices. And to combine those two things in a human being is like impossible. It's impossible to combine perfect righteousness and perfect justice. That's only, and frankly, if you've thought about this, and you've actually probably heard this in some of the Torah portions, that God is a perfect marriage of righteousness and justice. That only He is. That's like common knowledge in Torah study, is that only God perfectly embodies righteousness and justice together. So it has to be, and I think that that's where you get some of these ideas about the messianic personage having divine attributes, which frankly was probably puzzling to a lot of Hebrews. And it accounts for the fact that the Jews wanted to kill Yeshua when he came on the scene and declared himself to be a little too close to God. That's blasphemy. That's why we got to kill him, because he actually has to be a perfect representative of God in order to embody both of those things. And I would bring your attention to, you need look no further than David and Solomon to get a good example of this. Because David had it in his heart to build the temple. But why did God tell him, you cannot do it? His hands were covered in blood. Now that symbolically means what? He took a lot of life. Now I have looked at that and thought for a long time, well, it's because he was engaged in battle all the time and he killed a bunch of people. Well, it's not just that. Did he rule with perfect righteousness? Did he execute judgment with perfect righteousness when he did go to battle? No, he did not. He sent a dude straight to his death in a very wicked act of treachery. He did not execute righteousness. So when Father says, you've got blood on your hands, you are not going to be the one to build my temple, I look at David and go, he was a pretty righteous king as far as a human is concerned. But my goodness, he made some tactical blunders on multiple occasions. Okay, so he was not ruling with perfect righteousness, and certainly not in the destruction of his enemies. So, also think of, he remember when he was, you remember Nabal? Mm-hmm. He wanted to slaughter that dude just for insulting him. That's not perfect righteousness. You can't insult a dude, you can't kill a dude for insulting you. That's just not righteousness. So he does not represent perfect righteousness, even though he's like one of the best kings of a messianic type in the line of all the Hebrew kings. Now, Solomon comes along a little bit later and he says, he will be the one to build my temple. Why is he capable of building that temple? Well, he was a righteous judge. He had something that his father didn't have, but talk about idolatry. My goodness. Now that came later. I doubt very much if Solomon in his later years, having gotten himself quite involved in this idolatry type stuff, Father would have said, yeah, you're the guy who's going to build my temple. No. That comes later. Those things are backwards. Keith, tell us all about it, brother.
Well, Solomon fell into the trap of having 300 wives, and I believe that would be quite a trap. That's been a difficult one for me. And, to have all that, he must have been lustful in a lot of things, and all the things he did to keep his wives happy. So.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you got. Well, everybody who's married knows that you got to bend over backward to make your wife happy. Hopefully, you don't do stupid stuff to make her happy, though. But no, you're absolutely right, Keith.
He asked for a lev shema, obedient heart.
Yeah.
That's why right away honored him, gave him everything.
It seems like when he was younger, he had a very faithful heart and he was ready to serve and he was humble and he was wise. But as he grew older, he became more cynical and he got all these women and started compromising and all kinds of... for those young men out there in the house and some of you older men in the house, watch yourselves. Compromise. Compromise is difficult. And nothing inspires it like a woman. I'm sorry, that was sexist. I apologize. So now let's take a look at this symbolic, Joshua the high priest and Yeshua the king priest. This is obviously a prophetic symbol about Yeshua of the same name. Now this Yeshua, the Messiah, he does wield perfect political power. He does wield, when he makes war, it is in absolute righteousness. And when he wields spiritual power as a priest, he rules with perfect compassion. And I would highly recommend that you compare this with the study in the book of Hebrews. because that talks a lot about him being after the order of Melchizedek, as Jerry was pointing out, and why he is capable and a perfect high priest, because he is able to be compassionate, because he has been tested and tried like we have, because he lived as a human and he had to overcome the flesh. He knows what it's like. You know what I'm saying? So this Yeshua, our high priest and king, he melds these things perfectly, of righteousness and justice, just perfectly. And I want to point out a couple of passages to you. But I do recommend highly that you look at the book of Hebrews, particularly chapters 8 through 13, to get a little bit, and even before that, to look into this a little bit deeper. But I want to show you a couple of passages here that kind of talk about crowns and branches and righteousness and justice. Let's take a look at this. In the book of Revelation, we have a fascinating little passage here. In Revelation 19 and 11, we see some interesting similarities here. In Revelation 19 and 11, it says, "And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he does judge and make war. His eyes, were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns." Notice that. That's fascinating. "And he had a name written that no one knew but himself. And he was clothed with a clothing dipped in blood. And his name is called the Word of Elohim. And the armies which were in heaven followed him on white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he would smite the nations. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty Elohim. And he has on his clothing and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." There's some fascinating connections there with crowns and ruling in righteousness and meting out the justice of the Father in perfect righteousness. That's a fascinating connection. And then I want to point out to you another little passage from Jeremiah, which you've probably already contemplated. This is in Jeremiah 33. Where it starts talking about this branch. This is the reference that we get where he talks about this branch. And remember, in relation to the book of Zechariah that we're reading right now, when was the book of Jeremiah written? Before or after Zechariah?
Before.
That would have been before. About how long do you guess? 100 years? 120 years? Yeah. So Jeremiah was written before Zechariah and quite a ways. So Jeremiah is the first mention of this branch, but not in a sense. In a sense, you can dig in the Torah and also find a bit of a veiled reference to this branch. But take a look at this in Jeremiah 33, verse 15. It says, "In those days and at that time will I cause the branch of righteousness to grow up to David. And he shall execute judgment and righteousness in the land." Notice judgment and righteousness. "In those days shall Judah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name with which he shall be called, Yah, our righteousness. For thus saith Yah, David shall never want a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. Neither shall the priests, the Levites, want a man before me to offer burnt offerings, and to kindle meat offerings, and to do sacrifice continually." Now, when I read this passage, a couple of things really jumped out at me. Number one, obviously, the branch of righteousness, semach. You probably are familiar with that term. That's the Hebrew word semach, H6780. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but that obviously caught my attention. The second thing is executing righteousness and judgment. That's a fascinating thing because that compares kingship and priesthood. And then you notice that in this passage it's talking about both kings and priests. And I had always thought, and I still do to some degree, that he is saying that in the millennial kingdom, David will have a descendant on the throne of Israel forever. And that the Levites will begin to serve again. Is that the common understanding of this passage? Yeah. But what if you combine those into one person? What if you combine the fact that there will neither shall the priests, the Levites, want a man. They won't need a man. Think about it in that way. Not that there's going to be all these priests serving, although I believe from the book of Ezekiel you can get a pretty clear indication that the house of Levi will begin to serve again in the millennial kingdom. But what if that's not exactly what it's talking about here? It's like yes, they'll be serving, but we won't need them because we have a king and a priest of the most high righteousness. Just an idea. But this passage really kind of brought some interesting things to my attention. And in relation to that branch, I'm sure that you've heard this before, but the semak, the idea of the semak is, and if you kind of have to know a little bit about agriculture in order to see this idea about the branch, because a semak is actually like a shoot that comes up from an olive tree, is where it's most closely tied. You know that in Israel they have olive trees that are like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and some of them they say are like they go back way long. But I didn't realize this, but an olive tree normally it will produce fruit for a long time, but at some point it kind of doesn't do as well as it should. You know what they do? They chop it off at the stump. That's actually good for it, and it will continue to grow for another 400, 500, 600 years. But what's interesting is that it produces what's called a semak. And when you chop it down, it will start to grow right out of the stump, just like a lot of trees will. But what's interesting is that an olive tree will actually put forth what's called a root, a branch, a semak, where it, underground, part of the same root system, will pop out a branch of this same olive tree quite a distance away, and much later. Now that's a fascinating thing. That if you cut off the stump of David, and after some time and some distance away, a little branch pops up. It's actually connected to that same olive tree, but it's popping up some distance away and some time later. That is what semak is. Somebody give Jerry a microphone, and then we will go to Keith and Osmundo.
I believe that's called a netzer or something like that.
That is where the netzarim.
This is where the idea that Christ was born in Bethlehem, and as a branch he went down to Egypt, and he went from Egypt up to Nazareth. Is that where he went?
Yeah.
That's where he grew up. So he was a branch that started here, went here, and he went from there up to there.
Yes. So this semak and this netzar are also very closely related.
That's one of the questions they'll ask you over in Israel, the rabbis, to stump you. If you can't answer that one, they don't even want to talk to you.
Fair enough. Who is it? I don't know who came first. Whoever talks first must have raised their hand first. Go.
Yeah, this is Keith.
Keith. Pole position goes to Keith.
Earlier you were reading about, and it's in Revelation where Yeshua, his name is written on his thigh, a name no one knows.
Yeah.
But the thigh in the Hebrewism has to do with the progeny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Like Eliezer putting his hand under Abraham's thigh.
Right. And it was predicted that Yeshua would come from King David, right? Progeny down through Judah. And this idea that the name was written on the thigh, that it was prophesied that he would be this
offshoot,
this king to rule. Yeah, it's all one big little pieces here and there that really reinforce this idea that this has been in the planning since the beginning.
Absolutely, yeah. Excellent insight. Osmundo.
Keith, I like that. That's actually pretty cool. I'm going to look into that. So tying into what the scripture you just read, it's also in Jeremiah 11:1, and it says, "And a rod shall come forth from the stump of Yeshi, and a sprout from his roots shall be fruitful."
Mm-hmm.
So it's tying in exactly what you were talking about, and they actually use the word netzer for the word sprout.
Right. So yeah, those things are very closely related, and that's a great insight. Tracy, what do you got for me, sister?
And just something Keith said kind of triggered something about how you're reading in Revelation 19 that this name is written on his thigh.
Mm-hmm.
And it says something about this progeny, like being like a son. If you look at the menorah, it is a picture of the Word of God. It's got 22 almond blossoms on it, or 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And there's other indications that this menorah is a representation of the Word. And the center shaft, we all recognize to be the Messiah.
Yep.
And that center shaft is the same Hebrew word as thigh.
Yep.
So if you were to look at that word thigh, you'd see that same word being described as the center shaft of the menorah. So that's kind of an interesting connection,
Yeah.
I think.
Very cool. Very cool.
Also, one other thing that I was going to say too is, like, if you look at the word son in Hebrew, bane, I never noticed that the root word is to build. So when you look at the Strong's description of son, it says the builder of the family name.
Mm.
And then when you look at the root word for son, it's build. So Banah. And so we see that the Messiah is the builder of the family name. And we see here that it said a couple times that then you will know that Yahweh has sent me to you.
Yep.
And this is something that Messiah says in John 17, like several times, that they may know that you sent me.
Yep.
That they may know that you sent me.
Yep.
So he's the son that's coming to build the family name, and that we're supposed to receive him and receive his word.
Absolutely. Good insight. You know, Sir Seal mentioned just a moment ago in the chat box there about somebody being grafted in. You can take a look at that. That's a good insight, and it comes to the point of the end of this passage that I want to deal with as our last thing for this evening, which is that note at the end of this passage in chapter 6 that it says that those who are far off shall come to build in the temple of Yah. Have you heard that passage? Have you heard that before, that phrase? Those who are far off? Where have you heard that before?
Several times, like the Israelites are far off and the near.
Those who are far off and those who are near. That's, yes, absolutely. That made me think of, and remember, this is one of those amazing Bible study tools that you should always remember, is where have I heard this before? So where I heard that before was in the book of 1 Peter. So take a look at this in 1 Peter 2 and 4. It says this: so as you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but chosen and precious in Elohim's sight, you yourselves as living stones are built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood and to offer spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable to Yah through Elohim, to Elohim through Yeshua the Messiah. It talks about, in this same passage, those who are far off. I think I skipped that for some reason in this passage. I think I misquoted that.
No, you didn't. No.
Did I? Is it in here? I think I left it out of my.
The chosen race, royal priesthood later on, but
Yeah, it's part of this same passage, but I think I left it out of my quote for here for some stupid reason.
anybody see it?
Does anybody see that? Those who were far off have been brought near.
No, it's in Ephesians 2, like 13. I think.
Yeah, I must have just pulled the wrong passage. I'm so sorry, you guys. But yeah, this is a. You know, I think that it's in the beginning of the book of 1 Peter. Is it? In like the first couple of phrases?
That's Acts too.
But this one's interesting. This is the stone which the builders.
Yeah, so this is definitely connected, but there's a passage at the beginning of the book of 1 Peter, I believe it is, where it talks about you who were formerly far off have been brought near. And he's talking about, well, that's a good question, is who exactly is he talking about? Because he sounds like he's saying to the 12 tribes who were scattered abroad,
Right.
which we know from, I believe it's the prophet Hosea, who says that, if formerly I said, I don't know you, but then in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, you are my people. You see what I'm saying? So some people will look at this with a bit of two-house theology and say, well, that's talking about the house of Israel, the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim, which is a multitude of nations because of going back to Joseph and his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's where you've got these people coming from far off to build in the temple in a spiritual sense, because here Peter's talking about us believers being spiritual stones being built into a holy priesthood, a royal house. It's talking about building a spiritual temple. And so these people who are coming from far off are these people who are grafted into the family or back into the family, however you want to look at that from your two-house theology or your one-house theology. I don't know, whatever you want to look at that as. But what's interesting to me is that, but also they are building in the temple. You notice that the Hebrew construction of that phrase is actually building, they will build in the temple. That just struck me as a little bit odd, because you can't be in the temple unless you're what? A priest. Now, but that does talk about, this is from the same book of 1 Peter, you are a royal priesthood. You see what I'm saying? So this spiritual royal priesthood that Peter's talking about, and these people who are far off are like, this is interesting. It's starting to make sense that these people who are coming from far off are building in the temple, and they are actually priests, and they're building the temple of Yah, which is actually a house built of people. It's not a temple in a physical sense at all. So you can start to see a dualism kind of thing here, where yes, we're rebuilding an actual physical temple, but Yeshua is building a spiritual living temple built of human souls, so to speak. You guys are part of that temple, each one of you being a stone that is built upon the cornerstone that was chiseled without hands, right? This stone that strikes the feet of the statue and destroys the whole thing. It's a fascinating thing. So who is it? It's David Branton. Tell us what's happening, David.
Yeah, when you were talking about lively stones, you blew my mind with that one, by the way. It was hearkening my remembering Jesus entering Jerusalem, and they kind of rebuked him because the people were worshiping him.
Yes.
And he said, if they didn't worship me, the stones would cry out in their place.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The lively stone thing really, ooh.
That's a good one. That's a good one. And my final point this evening, and then we'll shut down this cookie stand, is that it says, and I'm going to go back to this passage because I think it's super critical. Yep, right here in verse 15, at the end of verse 15, and this shall come to pass if you will diligently obey the voice of Yah your Elohim. So, who needs to be diligently obeying, or this isn't going to come to pass? Is this for them? Is this for us? Or is it yes? The answer is yes. Probably both. That's always a good answer. It's probably both. Is he waiting for us? You remember how we've mentioned this several times before in our studies, where we're all looking around, we're kind of tapping our foot and waiting for the Messiah to return, and we're going to be, we're tapping our watch and going, dude, what are you doing, man? What are you waiting for? And he's like, he's looking at us, tapping his watch, going, dude, what are you doing? Why? I could have come back. I'm waiting for you guys. You guys are slacking. You're wrapped up in the world. You got your priorities all mixed up. You're not ready for me to come back. Are you kidding me? So it seems to me that this is always a good thing to see and to smack you in the face and to just really constantly look at. If you diligently obey the voice of Yah your Elohim. Now, who is that talking to? Is it talking to these people in that day, or is it talking to us? The answer to the question is yes. I think we do need to diligently obey the voice of Yah our Elohim, not because he's dependent upon us, but because we are his living stones. And we would need to be able to serve as living stones, or we're not terribly useful to him. Now, what's it going to take for us to become living stones who are diligently obeying the voice of Yah our Elohim? We know that we see it all the time. Persecution and difficulty and distress is often what is required for us to break out of our slumber. We know that that's what happened to the children of Israel in Egypt. I know that they were probably very comfortable for some time because of the favor of Joseph and because of the favor of Yah. But that persecution and difficulty and tribulation came in order to birth them through the Red Sea, the birth canal, if you will, into the Promised Land. And that was through that ritual of fire and water, so to speak, that they had to be born again into their land. And that now the same thing is needing to happen with you, the people of Yah, in Babylon. Got houses, got businesses, got grandkids, got children, got money, got bank accounts, got retirement accounts, looking for the wealth and the comfort of this world. He's saying, you're too comfortable in Babylon. Now, how does Father take care of his people who are too comfortable in Babylon? He takes away their stuff. Are you ready to have your stuff taken away? That doesn't sound like fun to me. But you know what? Unfortunately, that's what has to happen a lot of times. But the point is this. Remember that is how Father often gets us to pay attention. He takes away our stuff. Remember that it is much less painful when he takes away your stuff if you're not holding on to it too tight.
That's right.
So take your hands off of it and say, Father, I want to worship you. I don't want to worship my stuff. And if you need to take it away from me, I won't be too upset about it.
You can get over it.
I'll get over it as best I can. So learning to trust now. If you got stuff, I'm not saying feel bad if you got stuff. I'm saying don't be too attached to your stuff. Because therein lies idolatry in the way of provocation and stumbling and all kinds of problems. But that would be my final word on
the.
that.
Bring up the Deuteronomy 29 thing.
What about it?
Well, it says he's making the covenant to establish his people with those who stand here today and those
who are far off.
He doesn't say far off. He said those who are not here today. And
Those-
then after that, he says they that hold on. For you know how he lived in the land of Egypt and how he came through the midst of the nations through which you passed. That's us passing through the midst of the nations right now. He says, moreover, you've seen their abomination, their idols of wood, stone, and silver, and gold, their stuff.
Their stuff.
And then he talks about how you won't turn and so that's kind of all.
Angela is pointing out a passage that I am probably not going to have time, obviously not going to have time to get to, Deuteronomy 29, which I strongly encourage you to take a look at. It's a fascinating passage which ties directly, but I'm going to give the last word to Tracy. Thank you, Tracy, for waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Sure. I was just, this last verse here, again, wanted to just kind of encourage you to go read John 17 when Messiah's praying to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about how you gave me your words to give to them and they have received them. So we have this idea of it will come to pass if you diligently obey the voice of Yahovah, your Elohim. This stuff's going to come to pass. And again, in Peter, which you already shared, he says, since you have you obey the truth, you're obeying the word through the Spirit, something like that. I can't remember how he says it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So he's speaking there about obeying the word of God. And then again, Messiah is saying that they may know that you sent me to them. So it's this idea that they understand that you sent me to them. And then so we are all building that temple. We are all working with him to build that temple because of what he's done.
Yeah.
So I really see that messianic picture in that last verse.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thank you for sharing that, Tracy. That's great insight. Y'all have been wonderful. I've kept you too long, and I appreciate your patience. It's always fascinating to chat with you about the Word of our Father, and I hope that you were able to glean some good information from today's study. And I hope that you will continue to study this passage. The next time we get together, we'll take a look at moving forward a little bit to chapter 7, and we're picking up a little steam. We've gotten almost halfway through the book, haven't we? Is that about right? We're doing good though. We're learning some fascinating stuff.